September 30th, 1985, was the date when I had my first venture into advocacy. I was a resident in general surgery here at the University of Utah, and I, one night, was invited to a meeting. And so I had to make a decision. Do I go to a meeting or do I go home and get some sleep? And for whatever reason, I went to this meeting. And I remember the date because my life has not been the same since. At this meeting, there were two women from Los Angeles representing a group called Results. And it was formed just 5 years earlier, started by a substitute music teacher who gathered four of his friends in a living room, and they wrote letters to their congressman. And now 5 years later, they were in Salt Lake to see if they could find interest in Salt Lake to form a group of activists wanting to help create political will to end poverty. And so I listened to them, and they told me that 40,000 children were dying daily of preventable causes, 40,000, for lack of an immunization or lack of a 10-cent packet of oral rehydration salts or lack of breastfeeding. I mean, very simple things. And I was shocked by this. And they told me things that I could do just as an ordinary citizen to help fix that. Things like educating myself on the issues, meeting with my member of Congress, meeting with the editorial writer, writing a letter to the editor. And these were all things I could do. In fact, they sounded like fun. And so that night, I wrote my first letter ever to my congressman. And it felt good. And so that night, I went home, and I was the new group leader of this activist group in Salt Lake. And now I'm the chairman of the board. So it just goes to show, if you hang around long enough, what can happen. Now, I've been asked to talk about advocacy, and we're here because it's not okay with us that we live in a world where millions of people die because they don't have access to surgery. And many more millions are disabled for the same reason. And so the vision held in this room is that we have a world where every person on earth have access to surgery. They could save their lives or fix a disability. So what I'd like to do in the few minutes I have with you is give you a couple of examples of campaigns that Results has been engaged with over the years, and give you some idea of what might be involved in getting from where we are now to where we want to be. So two examples. The first one, microcredit. In about 1986, we became aware of a man named Muhammad Yunus, who was a economist in Bangladesh. And he was frustrated with the condition in his country. People were dying. He was teaching at the university these elegant theories, and they seemed to have no effect on the country. So he went to a village right near his university and met a woman named Sophia Khatun, and she made bamboo stools, to sit on. Beautiful product, worked very hard. He asked her, "How much money do you make?" And she said, 2 cents a day. And he thought this was unbelievable. 2 cents a day, how is it possible? He was ashamed that he lived in a society where a woman could work so hard, make only 2 cents a day. Well, how is that? Well, she lacked the capital to buy the bamboo. So she was dependent on a trader to give her the bamboo in exchange for the finished product at a price that he fixed. So he loaned her, didn't give her, but loaned her $6. Her income immediately went from 2 cents a day to $1.25 a day. She was now able to feed her family 3 meals a day, send her daughter to school, put a tin roof on the house. All that was not happening for lack of $6. So, make a longer story shorter, he ultimately formed his own bank because the banks were not interested. They said, "You're nuts if you think that illiterate women with no collateral can pay back loans." That was the conventional wisdom at that time. So a few years later, we've heard about him. Many results volunteers go to Bangladesh to see what's happening, and it's amazing. And Eunice, one of the great souls on the planet, perfect spokesperson for this movement. So we introduced legislation. One of our volunteers in Cleveland asked his congressman, "Would you introduce legislation?" And he did. And we met with congressmen around the country. We've got about 65 groups in the U.S. working on global issues, these nests of activists that we train. And we got congressional allies. We got Eunice to do calls with editorial writers, and they would write editorials. And there was a series of articles in the Christian Science Monitor that resulted in a 60 Minutes story that I can remember carrying around my VCR. This is before iPads. I had to carry around a VCR to show anyone who'd sit still for 15 minutes, including my newly elected senator. So it kind of give you an idea of what's necessary in order to have people find out about this new concept. So the legislation's introduced, and we get huge resistance. The U.S. Agency for International Development did everything in their power to stop the legislation. We mobilized. We got 100 editorials written all over the country, and the legislation passed. And that first year, we got $50 million of foreign aid money to go to this kind of activity. And each year, we've lobbied for more. And this year, it's at $265 million. Now, how do you get microcredit expanded throughout the world? In the mid-90s, John Hatch, who is a board member of ours, who is the father of village banking, he proposed that we put on a world summit for microcredit. And so after 3 years of preparation, we put one on in 1997. And we had 2,900 delegates from 137 countries gather in New York City. And all aligned on the goal of reaching 100 million of the world's poorest family, mainly women, by the end of the year 2005. And we were criticized for having too big a goal. And each year we had follow-up summits. And we missed the goal by 11 months. So 100 million at the, November of 2006, we reached the goal of reaching 100 million of the world's poorest families. And there are now more than 3,000 organizations engaged in microfinance throughout the world. And then the culmination for me was when Professor Eunice got the Nobel Peace Prize. So we went from conventional wisdom being, "You're nuts, that's not the way we do development," to, "Of course you can loan poor women money and get 98% repayment rates." And he invited me to be there when he got the Nobel Prize, and it was a highlight of my life. And this is a picture of me with Eunice, and I think I only had 2 glasses of champagne at that point. A second example is the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria. How many of you are aware of this? Oh, so quite a few. Okay. So this is an independent organization. It was set up 10 years ago. They just celebrated their 10th birthday. And it was created to really accelerate funding to fight HIV and tuberculosis and malaria. And it's actually been quite phenomenal what has happened. You know, your friends who tell you the world's going to hell in a handbasket. There are a lot of good things happening in the world. And the Global Fund, it's set up, what they do is they receive money from donor countries and foundations, and then they award grants. And it's set up in a way to minimize fraud and abuse. And so each year, we would lobby for more money for the Global Fund. And to just give you an idea, what they've accomplished in 10 years. 4,000 people, 4,000 deaths are averted every day. That's how many lives they save. They've saved over 6 million lives. And we're actually now talking about end of malaria deaths by 2015. We're talking about eradicating mother-to-child transmission of HIV. We're talking about the end of AIDS. I mean, this is 10 years ago, there was no talk like that. So we've got increasing amounts of money that the U.S. has put in toward the Global Fund over the years that we've worked for. And then comes the economic downturn. Isn't that a nice phrase, economic downturn? What it did was put millions of more people into poverty throughout the world. And then they knew that they're worried about budgets. You know, budgets are slashed everywhere. And the Global Fund, trying to map out what they're doing, and again, they're on this, great momentum, and all of a sudden this economic downturn, they're worried about their budgets. And so they're talking about cutting back. And in the House of Representatives, they were talking about a 40% cut to the Global Fund. And so we mobilized, we talked to our congressmen, we talked to them about the fact that foreign aid is less than 1% of the budget. We're not in a debt problem in the U.S. because of foreign aid. We are not spending too much money on poor people. That is not our problem. And when you make cuts, for some people, it's a cut in a benefit. For some, it's a cut in a subsidy. For these people, it's a coffin. So we mobilized, and we wanted to target the administration because they set a budget that goes to Congress, and that's kind of the starting point. And so one of our allies in the House, Representative Barbara Lee, authored a letter to go to her colleagues. And we mobilized. We got more than 100 pieces of media generated, and we got 101 signers of this letter to the president asking him to make a 3-year pledge for the Global Fund, which had never been done before. It's always been an annual thing. 3-year pledge, and that would kind of signal other countries, because for every dollar we put in, other donor countries put in 2. And we do lead the world on this stuff. And so the administration got the message, made a 3-year pledge of $4 billion, which was more than we'd ever done before. And the first 2 years, Congress appropriated 1.05. Last year, the president, with some discretionary money, put in another 250. And this year's budget that he submitted to Congress is 1.65 billion, which would meet the 4 billion that he pledged 2 years ago. So we still need to fight for that because Congress is, they're still going through the budget process. But this example, again, shows what can be done You know, another example of when you're told it's impossible. I can't tell you how many times I've been told, forget what you're doing because it's impossible. Now, where are we? Conventional wisdom is surgery is too expensive. We have a growing body of evidence that surgery is cost effective. And we know in our bones that the need out there is huge. So, as far as advocacy for what we're up to, I think we're in our infancy. There is one action I'd like to tell you about. The American College of Surgeons, at the urging of Ray Price and Kathleen Casey, have written a letter from the leadership of the American College of Surgeons to our U.S. representative to the World Health Assembly, asking them to introduce and pass a resolution that's authored by Adam Kushner that we might hear a little bit about tomorrow. And I don't know that we've had a response yet, but our leadership is taking action. And again, it's always the way, this is always the way it is. It comes from the bottom up. Our congressmen, they don't act because they're elected because they know a lot about poverty. Far from it. And our ACS leadership, you know, they had to be pushed. And that's the way it always is. So we know that we can change conventional wisdom. We know that money can be mobilized to do these things. Just in closing, I'd like to say that I have the greatest job in the world as a surgeon. I get to save lives. I get to contribute to people in a very meaningful way on almost a daily basis. And I can tell you that what I get to do as an activist has far greater impact in the world than I could ever do as a surgeon. So I'm hoping my comments here have given you some ideas about what you could do, what you'd like to do to help create this political will to make surgery available to everyone. And I look forward to working with you to achieve that. Thank you very much.